All right, so we're going to get started here just so we make sure we stay on schedule and we have time to get through everything. But thank you so much for joining and thanks for introducing yourselves. If you still would like to share your information and how you've interacted with data, we'd love to see that. You can do that as we continue here. So welcome. Welcome to our Hour of Code. This is always a fun time of year to be able to do these activities, whether you're in a coding class and you've done a lot of coding or you're totally brand new. Um, this is just a great chance to dive into this. And today, I think in particular, this is just such an interesting topic and so important, as you'll see, just in understanding data through visualizations. So before we get started, we'll just introduce ourselves really quick. So my name is Ryan. I am a curriculum developer here at CodeHS. I was a high school teacher, taught physics for 7 years, and then actually was a data analyst for Penn State University for a few years before joining CodeHS. So, and then we also have Alex, who is the one who actually designed these activities today. And so I'll let him introduce himself.
Hey everybody, my name is Alex. I'm also a curriculum developer. Similar to Ryan, I was a high school teacher before joining CodeHS, and I had the pleasure of being able to put together some of the things that we're going to be working on today. So hopefully you enjoy it and learn a little bit about data visualization and coding. Also joining us today are Claire and Ebony. They'll be supporting us in helping answer questions and debugging anything that comes up as well. So thank you, Claire and Ebony, for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Cool. So what is data visualization? What are we talking about here? Really, quite simply, it's our effort to be able to visualize complex data through a variety of means. So it could be through charts or graphs or images. So the goal is really just to get a visual on what can be complex. And so why do we do this? You'll see just in a few examples, it is so much easier to understand data and be able to extract some interesting information when we can visualize it and see it in different ways in context from where it's coming from. And humans we've evolved to process visual information. And so it's so much easier and we're quicker to be able to gain some insights with visualizations. So if we take a look at this first example, you'll see what I mean. So the top right corner here, there's just a lot of numbers. We could stare pretty hard at it. We see years and some maybe temperatures, days of rain, but it's kind of hard to gain any sort of insight, whether things are increasing or decreasing or how it varies, regionally. So if you take that and then you contrast it to down here at the bottom, so very clearly we're looking at March 2019 data. This left chart, it's the hours of sunshine per month, and we have a scale. And so very quickly, we can see where in the UK has the most hours of sunshine per month in March. And so we can see with the scale, these yellow regions have more hours of sun than these darker regions. So without having to scan charts, it's just so easy to glean some insight about a whole or a few countries here in this case, and what's going on. And you can see the same thing with the millimeters of rain and maximum temperature. Being able to visualize it graphically in this case, and put it in the context of England, put it on the map, is just so much easier to understand what's going on and gain some insight. And lucky for us, we can use computer science to be able to take that top chart here with all the numbers and be able to process that and then create these visualizations fairly quickly. So as an example, here might be a simple program where this data or this program can read in the raw data. We say when it's raw, when it's just in its kind of list form. So it's reading in this raw data, it's doing some processing. We can edit the styling and what we want to see, and then the output is a chart. So in today's activity, we're going to be looking at some data visualization tools that do just that. You can input the raw data and then create a visualization out of it. And then we'll actually look behind the hood and how these tools are able to do that as well. So before we get going with the activities, we have an awesome guest speaker from the company Tableau. and Blair will introduce himself in a moment. But Tableau, if you haven't heard of it, if you ever get into data science, you will definitely come across it at some point. It's one of the most popular data visualization tools out there, and they work with companies and individuals to help really understand their data, all through visualizations and interactive visualizations. So Blair, I'll hand it off to you so that you can introduce yourself.
Great. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Thank you, Ryan, for the introduction, Alex, Ebony, and Claire for including me in today's conversation. Data visualization is something that I'm really excited about and is a large reason as to why I work at Tableau. So Alex, if you just want to hit the next slide, I can kind of give a little bit of a background about me and why I might be relevant to this conversation. So I currently work as a product manager at Tableau. I've been there for 5 years now. The company's inception was back in 2013, and I joined in 2016, beginning of 2016. So it's been a while. It's been a great journey. And before that, I went to school at the University of Vermont, and I studied business and information systems, which gave me a pretty good background on SQL and databases and how that relates then into visualizations and how people use those to make decisions at companies. And then I also worked as a co-instructor at the University of Washington, teaching a class similar to the one that you guys are kind of talking about today around information visualization. So that course took master's students through a full quarter-long curriculum of the importance of data visualization, and then really the nuts and bolts as to how to create powerful visualizations using data and tools that I think you guys are going to be talking about today. And then on a personal level, and this actually comes full circle here at the end, I really enjoy skiing and rock climbing, and I put cooking down here because it's kind of an aspiring goal of mine. I want to be a much better cook. But I hail from the Pacific Northwest. Tableau is a Seattle-based company, and so I came back to Seattle after being on the East Coast and landed at Tableau and have been in Seattle ever since. Looking outside, it's a very gray day. It's very typical. So my timeline is kind of at the bottom here because when Claire asked me to come in and speak, it was kind of how is coding applied through my life and what does it look like out in the wild? Well, I started out by taking my first few coding classes actually in college. So I took an HTML class, and I took, what was it, a JavaScript class and a Python class. I didn't do anything in data visualization. You guys are getting a huge head start here, which is awesome. And then I took some SQL classes. So that what I would kind of consider my coding background. As far as application, I didn't really have any until I started to look for jobs. And the first job I landed was a product consultant at Tableau, which is translated into a bunch of different terms. It could be solution architect, solution engineer, product engineer, they're all kind of synonyms for the same thing. But essentially my job at Tableau was when I started was to teach people how to use the product efficiently so that they were comfortable buying, essentially. And so I sold to teachers, I sold to financial organizations, I sold to doctors. So this data visualization can be applied to so many different places, and it's been why it's been so kind of exciting working at Tableau. And then I got the teaching job at the University of Washington, which I taught for a couple quarters. And then that all led me to becoming a product manager. So as a product manager, now I'm not in charge of selling the product. I'm actually helping influence like how we make the product more usable for our customers that are wanting to take advantage of data visualization. So that's a lot of speaking. And what I'd love to do next is actually play a little game with you guys. So I think Ryan did a really good job of teeing up kind of the importance of data visualization, but to really hammer it home, I wanted us to all just look at this data for a second. So this could be I think I saw some folks that have some projects around stock analysis or grades. So this could be any of that. So what I want us to do right now is to have everyone just count the number of 9s that they see in this data set. And once you think you have the right answer, go ahead and throw it in the chat, and I'll just open that up. So again, count the number of 9s as quickly as you can and throw the number in the chat. Okay, a few numbers trickling in. I'm seeing 14, 13, 12, 9 9s, 8 9s, 12 with a question mark. Okay, Alex, I'm gonna have you advance the slide. Okay, ready? Now we're getting the number of 9s a second time. Okay, ready? Go. Nice. Okay, so now I've got a consistent number 14 coming in, and I actually don't know how many 9s there are, so I'm gonna trust that there are 14 9s. So what we did right there is we actually encoded this data, and so encoding is translating data into a visual element. And what that does for all of us right there, like what we just experienced, is reducing the cognitive load that we're putting on our brains in interpreting and extrapolating information from data. So it became a lot easier when we encoded the number 9 with a bolding or a shading. So other encodings that you can imagine are like color, or I think the previous example that Ryan had showed was looking at something on a map. So there's lots of, and I'm sure that the exercises that you guys will go through today, you guys are going to translate data into visual elements. And so that whole process is called encoding, and it is really, really powerful, and is what Tableau has kind of made its name off of doing, is making that really, really easy for people to do. So if we jump to the next slide, this is my plug for Tableau, and is just really a mission that I'm really passionate about, and is why I've spent so much time at the company. So this is our mission that's guided us since our inception, is that we help people see and understand data. And we really put an emphasis on the people, because we want to make sure that anyone, no matter who they are, they have the power to explore and understand data, because we think that it's such an important asset in today's world. So if we jump to the next slide, so we really made our name with our first tool that we brought to market, which was Tableau Desktop. And so here you can see just a quick GIF of how you might use the product. And I hope that all of you at some point get an opportunity to download the product and try it for yourself, because it makes it super, super easy to drag and drop elements. These are columns of data onto a screen and make visualizations. And the power of being able to do that so quickly and easily is that you can start to ask and answer your own questions kind of at the speed of thought. So the process of potentially like coding a visualization can take a lot of time, and sometimes the question can actually get lost just in that whole process. So right, so here you're just able to encode information really, really quickly and easily. And so if you jump to the next slide, so one of the things you might be asking is, well, why am I talking to you guys about a tool that makes what you guys are about to go and experience so much easier? Why don't we just jump to the easy part? Well, in my experience, I think that I've found that having a fundamental understanding of what it is that some of these advanced tools are doing has helped me so much in the long run. I think that with some of these easy to use tools, with great power comes great responsibility. And all of a sudden, it's easy to make some visualization that really is not at the core really what it is that you're trying to convey, or you can make a pretty picture that really doesn't say a whole lot. So I think that what you guys are doing and the steps that you're taking to really get a good fundamental understanding of how to create visualizations, maybe in just, I guess, starting from the building blocks of how the Tableau software kind of came to be, is super, super critical. I found that applying my SQL knowledge and my Python knowledge has allowed me to take what I'm able to do in any data visualization tool, whether it's Tableau or any other, to much greater depth than I ever was before, if maybe I just kind of went straight to the easy to use product. So it's something that I'm super passionate about, and I actually have a number of pet projects that I have on the side. So if you jump to the next slide, this is an example of a project that I'm working on right now with a not-for-profit. So the Northwest Avalanche Center. I said that I was a big backcountry skier, and what they do is they put out telemetry data for all the different stations around Washington State, and they also provide some statistics about that snow depth and potentially some predictions. So what I've been doing this winter is helping them translate this block of text, this data set that is pretty limited, into, if we go to the next slide, an interactive dashboard that tells a much deeper story. So the value here is that we're able to look at the data in context and are able to interact with the visualization and see things that maybe we weren't able to see before by just looking at that big block of text. So, and again, just anomaly detection and pattern recognition is so much easier, and you can do it so much faster with visualizations like these. So that's a little bit about my story. I think that the next part up is we have a little bit of a Q&A if anyone has any questions for me about anything that I just talked about. So I'll kind of open it up to the floor.
So if people have questions, feel free to, in the chat, actually write those questions out. And if you need a second to ask your teacher, they can write into the chat as well.
Yeah, so there was a question about, Blair, you mentioned Python and SQL. And so somebody was wondering about R. Do you have any experience with R yourself?
I do. I think that having a background in statistics is incredible. I would say take as many statistics classes as you can. It's something that I'm always going back to those old textbooks for. So R is, you can actually use it as a visualization tool. So I think that as you're working with data sets, it can be really easy to just output them so you can visualize the data. That can make maybe asking the next question, or maybe taking the next iteration of data cleansing that you want to do really easy. Also, I've used it also just in the predictive kind of creating algorithms to kind of create predictions as well. And so I use that for creating data sets that then I use to visualize.
And then just maybe one more question here. There's a question about how students could get access to a tool like Tableau to explore its capabilities. Do you offer an environment for students?
Yeah, so a couple ways. First off, we have a 2-week trial that you can download, so you can get your hands on it for at least 2 weeks. For students, there is a program that's available that teachers would need to sign up for in order to give their class access to Tableau for free. I'm pretty sure it's for free. There's information on our website for how to do that.
Cool. All right. So if you have any other questions, feel free to keep sending them in. We're going to move forward here, so we can get you guys doing some of this as well. But thank you, Blair, for sharing your story and kind of your path through all of this. And it's so interesting. You know, each step of the way is just slightly different, and kind of keep following your interests. So yeah, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm going to drop off, but if there are any other questions, I think Claire has my contact info if you want to send that my way.
Cool.
All right. Enjoy, everyone. Bye.
All right. Once again, we're really appreciative that Blair was able to join us to give us some real world context for how all these tools are actually used. And what Blair showed us were some more complex examples of what data visualizations can look like. Ours are going to be much more simple, but as he had mentioned, right, learning these underlying structures and how we can piece them together using code is kind of the step that we're starting at today. So learning how we can actually build these things using, in this case, we'll be using JavaScript to do so. But being able to do so is important in order to understand how these more complex things work. So as Blair had mentioned, right, data visualization is a useful tool in almost any field. Right, we see visualizations being used in science, government, sports, agriculture, music, economics, and today we're actually going to be looking at politics, looking at voter registration data, and being able to figure out, you know, how different states and different demographic groups are registered to vote and what the implications for that are long term for our society. So computing has made a lot of incredible contributions to the field of data visualization. We can process large amounts of data and constantly update them to stay accurate. We can add interactivity to visual data, and we can blend together science and art. And visualizations at this point, as we kind of saw, aren't just graphs and pie charts anymore. There's lots of different types, and more being created every day. As we kind of mentioned, a lot of these visualizations are a little bit more advanced. So what we're going to look at is some of the most basic commonly used types, ones that you're definitely familiar with, but I want to just rehash so that everyone's on the same page. We're really going to be looking at two specific examples. One is just the pie chart. So a pie chart is a good choice when a percentage can be useful in interpreting data. So we might not necessarily have an exact value here, but that might not be what we're trying to display, right? In this case, what we're trying to display is the percentage of users that are checking material posted by others, right? So in this case, what we see is it looks like 12% of Twitter users check their Twitter once a day, right? It doesn't actually matter how many people we're talking about here. Either way, 12% of the group will probably check their Twitter feed. And as we can see down here, right, this is a group of about 1,500 people. So that's a pretty substantial percentage. But what we're most interested in here is, okay, we know that 12% are checking once a day. So if I'm a company, right, that is, you know, trying to use Twitter as a device to post either social messages, like, you know, how many of our users are potentially looking at that. Pie charts are a good way to visually understand the percentages of people that you're going to actually be able to reach via a specific system. The one that we're going to focus on the most today is a bar chart. So I'm sure everyone's familiar with the bar chart, but we'll actually be coding an example of a bar chart, which is a little more difficult than it sounds. So this is actually a stacked bar chart, which offers even more information in each bar. So what we see here is the directors with the greatest number of awards. And what we notice is that in the first bar, we've got the highest. So Ethan Cohen and Joel Cohen are seemingly have won the most awards for thrillers, dramas, and crime films, right? That seems to be the category that they focus on the most. We can see that through the genres, right? Each of these associates with one of these specific bars. What's interesting, though, is if we look at the third bar from the left, right? This is Steven Spielberg. Even though his numbers are a little bit lower, substantially lower than the Coen brothers, what we do see is that he's got a plethora of different genre types, right? So this kind of shows the career of somebody who's interested in a lot of different genres. which might be more impressive, right? The breadth in which this Steven Spielberg is able to create movies and win awards is shocking and impressive compared to some of his contemporaries. So, this bar chart has a lot of information in it, even though, if we were to look at this from a numerical perspective, it might be a lot harder to discern this information. This makes it really easy to understand. And what we notice here, and we'll be talking about these terms that I'm sure people are familiar with, but this is the y-axis that we're dealing with here, right, which is the total number of award wins. And at the bottom here is the x-axis. In this case, it is the director that has won this number of awards. So if we notice here, right, these are all different directors, and this adds up to their total amount of award wins. So in the program that we're going to be creating, we're going to be using X and Y axes to help label our data and figure out where it's supposed to go. And so we'll be doing that in a second. Importantly, just as Blair had mentioned, that interactivity can really engage users and allow them to narrow in on information that they're interested in. Right. So when we create data visualizations, interactivity is also another component that we want to be paying attention to. Right. In this particular example, this interactive lets you hover over each city, which will then display the population for that particular city. Right. So when we're creating visualizations, not only is it important that we can see these differences, but if we can interact with them, it might help, relieve some of that cognitive load that Blair was talking about in terms of encoding the data that we're going to be using. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating data visualizations in two different ways. The first is we're going to be just using a simple graph generator that was created at CodeHS. We used a coding library called Toast. So this is the Toast UI. So this was used to create easy and simple to create data visualizations. So in the first part of this activity, what we're going to do is we're simply going to just use this graph generator that we've created. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look behind the scenes at what goes into creating this graph generator by using the Toast UI library and actually coding our data directly into a program. So we're going to be looking at these two things. So what we're going to do first is we're going to take a look using this graph generating tool that we've created. And the first question that we want to ask is, I've been watching a lot more Netflix over the course of this quarantine period. And a simple question came to mind, which was, if I'm watching this and I'm not watching cable TV, how has cable use changed over time, right? Are more or less people using cable? Because it feels like it's less, but I don't have definitive proof that that's necessarily true. So oftentimes when we create visualizations, we need to start with a question, right? And that question is guiding the way that our data kind of tells a story. And so in this first case, we're asking, how has cable use changed over time, specifically in the last 10 years? What's happened? And so I've got some data here, right? That it's simple data and it's not a lot, but it's basically saying, okay, in the past 6-7 years, how has cable users changed? How have cable users changed, and how have streaming users changed? And streaming includes all of the big, Netflix, Hulu, HBO, all of those things. So how have these things changed? So in this graphic, we can probably notice a trend in the way that the data is going, right? We can see that the cable use is decreasing and the streaming use is increasing, right? We can see that. If we had more data here, it might be harder for us to see that. For the sake of this just exploration, what we're going to do is we're going to turn this into a graphic visualization. And so what I'll do now is I'll actually show us the tool that we'll be using, and I'm going to include this data into this visualization tool. So this is the graphing tool that we'll be using. It's called our graph generator. And on one side, what we're going to include is some details about the graph that we're going to create, and then we're going to actually input the data that we'll be using. So you'll all be able to do this in a second. And so what I wanted to do is I just wanted to highlight how we could input this data first, and then give you an opportunity to actually input some data of your own and create a graph. So in this case, right, what we were looking at is our cable use, right? How has this changed over time? So what I need to do here is I'm going to choose the column type, right? We're going to just make this a bar graph type. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to name my graph, right? So in this case, I might call it cable usage over time, right? That might not be the most detailed title, but that's just what we'll go with right now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to label my my y-axis. And in this case, the data that I'm using is actually going to be users, right? Total users. And I'm just going to specify here that this is in millions. right? So that's how many people are actually using cable versus using streaming services. And so this is the x-axis category, oh, sorry, the y-axis category that's going to show up on the left-hand side. It's going to be the vertical, the numerical values on the vertical direction. So I've started here, and what I could do also is I could change my graph width, my graph height, because we can't see the graph yet. I'll just hold off on that. And now what we'll do, and this is the most kind of the more complicated aspect of our graph, is we're going to now input the graph data. So in this case, we've got this x-axis category. And what we mean by that is, if we think about the original graph that we had looked at, right, where we had the number of awards, and at the bottom we had the directors. Well, in this case, our x-axis is going to be the streaming service. So whether or not you're using cable or streaming, it's a service that you're using to get your television. So we'll just call it a TV service here. And so we're just going to label this as TV service. Okay. And then what we'll do first is we'll enter one of the x-axis items. And by x-axis item, what we mean here is what is one of the x-axis categories going to be. So what we had originally in the other example was directors. And then one of the directors was Steven Spielberg, right? So what we would do is we would put Steven Spielberg in this x-axis item. In this case, because we are doing cable users and streaming users, what we'll do is I will do cable. So I'll just call this cable here. And now what we're going to do is we're going to enter data for this particular service, right? And so what we're tracking right now is users over time. So in the numerical data, what we want to do is we're going to enter a category, and this category is going to be the year that we want to input. In this case, the first piece of data that we collected was from 2013, and it was 100.5 million users. So right now we've got a graph, and what we see here is our graph is generated, and it includes the title, right? It also includes the y-axis, the x-axis, and also the x-axis category, right? So we had cable as this category here, and so we can see that cable is now it was one of the x-axis items that is on this category. And what we can see here is when we hover over it, it shows me that in 2013, our number here is 100.5, right? And we know that that's total users in millions, right? On its own, this graph isn't very useful. In this case, we're just showing one piece of information. This is something that I could simply just read on a table. What we want to do now is we'll want to include more data to show how this has changed over time. In this case, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to add a column here. So when I click Add Column, it'll add another data set that I can add to this graph. In this case, we're still adding to cable. And so what we'll do is we'll add another year. In this case, we'll add 2016. And the data that shown said 97. And if I add another column here, I can do 2019. And then under that, write 86.5. Now, if I hit Create Graph, what we notice is the graph changed. It includes 3 different categories, right? 2013, 2016, and 2019. And it shows how many total users there are for each of those. And we'll notice that this is still under the category of cable, right? So each of these items, right, is completely related to cable. Now, if we wanted to show our streaming use as well, we could add another row to add another x-axis category. When I click Add Row, it'll just add another row here. And what I can do is I can write streaming. In this case, now what I can do is I can add the same numbers from those years. So we know that this is 20.6, and this is 26.9, and this is all data that was on the presentation. I'll go back to that in a second. But now I filled out this graph. And when I look at it now, what we can see, I'll change the color because that's hard to see. What we see now is we have cable and streaming side by side, and we can see the changes in cable and streaming use over time. So we can see that streaming use is increasing pretty substantially in the last 6 years, right? It's gone from 20 to over 44 million. So, right, this is doubling in size. And cable, although it's decreasing, it's not decreasing at the same rate that we might anticipate, right? So this could mean a couple of other things. It could mean that there are just more people that, like, the people that have been using cable are still using cable for the most part, but the people that are streaming, right, this could be a whole new group of people, right? We can imagine that this is 16 through 21-year-olds who are entering, right, their, like, the years where they're starting to pay for these subscription services, and they realize that they don't want to use cable, right? They would rather just use the streaming services, right? So these are just assumptions that we can make from this data, right? Because we would assume that this this number would decrease the same amount, but that's not necessarily the case. And so, these are things that we can glean from looking at the data in a more visual context. And so as we can see here, we were able to create a pretty useful graph in a matter of seconds by using this graph generator tool that we built here at CodeHS. So this is something that we're going to actually have you guys take a look at. And you'll notice, right, if I change the graph width, I can change the width of the graph. I can also change the height of the graph, and we'll see that the color changes each time that we re-click that. But we've also got some systems in place to help you out. So if for some reason you forget a data set, if I click create graph, it'll say that it seems you forgot to include some data. And then it will highlight the area that you might have missed. You'll also notice that there are some X's here, right? So if you click those, it'll remove that particular data set from the graph. So this tool is pretty interactive. It's an easy way. It's kind of like, imagine like a Tableau Lite of sorts. And this is a way that you can actually create data visualizations. So what we're going to do now is I know I went over that quickly, but I want to give you time to actually explore. We're going to give you an opportunity to work through a visualization on your own. And so what we're going to do now is, if you have a CodeHS account, we'd really like you to log in. Logging in is important because it'll allow you to save some of the data that you're working on. So if you don't log in and you work through these problems and if you quit and you try to come back to it, you won't be able to save it. So we highly recommend logging in to make sure that you have access to all of the projects that you're working on in the future. And what we're going to do is, so if you're not logged in, you can go to this URL of codehs.com/hoc/data_visualization. We also have a link that you can go to directly and this will actually be, and I'm posting this in the chat, this link is going to take you directly to the exercise that you're going to be working on. So this link here is going to take you to the correct playlist. But you're going to want to go to this activity titled Charting Voter Registration in the United States. So I've posted posted in the chat the link, and Ebony has as well. Thank you. And so if you go to that link, it should take you to this page, right? Oh, sorry, not this page. It should take you to this page, which is Charting Voter Registration in the United States. And so essentially what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be looking at some data about voter registration in the US. And we're going to try to make some, assumptions about what's going on here and the implications that might be a result of this data. And so what we have here is we've got some data here from the Kaiser Family Foundation. And the data looks a little small here. If you can't read it, I'll pull it up on the next slide. But the idea here is that in this, using this data here, can we create a visualization that shows voters, like registered voters, as a share of the voting population, right? So out of all white non-Hispanic voters, out of all Asian voters, out of all Black voters, what percentage of these voters are actually registered to vote? And so that's what we'll be looking at in this particular example. So to give you all a hint, and so the idea is that you all get to this page. To give you all a hint, right? In this case, our x-axis category that we're going to try to be creating is going to be location, right? So in this case, the United States is the category that we want to be filling in, right? So United States here, right? This is our x-axis category. So all of this data that we're going to be looking at, we want to compare it all to the United States. So in this case, right, what's the data that we want to input here? Right? What's the different categories that we're looking at? And then what's the actual data that we want to include? One way to think about this is if our y-axis is, a percent of a whole, right? So if this is like total, like out of 100%, I'm sorry, this would be like percent users, right? So then we could just simply input, instead of a percentage, we can just input a numerical value. Because that numerical value will equal the percentage. So what we'd like to do is give you a couple of minutes right now. Let's call it like 5 to 10 minutes and see if you can figure out how to put together a visualization using this data. And I'll pull this data up in a second. So the data is here in case you want to look at it again. But so this is the information. How can we take this data and turn it into a data visualization using the graph generator tool that I just showed you? And just so we're aware, keep the graph type as column, because then it'll work accordingly. So just make sure that this is as is. And so I'll give everybody some time. Let's call it 5 to 10 minutes. If you finish early, what you can do is in the participants. Oh, no, we don't have that function here. Never mind. We'll just wait a couple of minutes and I'll check back in with people, and I'll show everyone what the visualization I ended up creating was through this graph. And if you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat. All right, we're gonna give everybody just another minute because we're running out of time right now. We'll just give everybody another minute, and then we'll move on to the next portion. Okay, so hopefully you were able to play around with that tool, and hopefully you were able to create a graph that looked a little something like this. So the idea here is that each racial demographic, would count as its own category, and we would just include the percentage here as the numerical data that we'd include. And then, the percent users would be our y-axis, and the United States would be one of the categories. So in this case, we could see in the United States, right, the share of all voter registration, the total population, right, how many people are registered to vote. We can see that there's some inequity here in terms of, which racial demographics actually are registered to vote. The one question to think about that is, how does that affect representation? How does that affect who we vote for, and how that ends up, becoming a reality? And so that's an interesting thing to think about. And what we want to do now is we're actually going to look at, how we can create this tool just by using code, by using JavaScript. And so what we'll do now is, if you notice at the bottom here, there is a coding the voter registration data assignment. If you could click on that, or if you're on this page, you could click continue, and it'll take you to the next assignment. And that is going to be this coding the voter registration data. And what we'll see here is we actually have an HTML document. And if this is unfamiliar to you, it's okay. I know it looks a little intimidating, but there are a lot of comments here that will help you figure out what to do. So ultimately, what we need to focus on is there is this tag here called a script tag. And inside of this script tag is all the information that we need in order to build this visualization. And so the things that you're going to need to focus on, and the things that you're going to actually be coding in order to get this visualization to work, are these this data variable and also this options variable as well. And so in this data variable, there are two attributes associated with this data object, if we're familiar with that term. There's a categories, and then there's a series attribute. And the categories attribute should be filled in already with the x-axis value. In this case, it'll say United States for you all. For me, I'm trying to do the cable users just to show you what that looks like. So in this case, we've got this cable users category, and it's a string value, and it's important that after the string value, there's a comma. So as long as these things are there, we can get this to work. The series, right, so the category, right, is the x-axis value, and the series is the actual data that we're going to be inputting. So here we've got the name of that data. In this case, it'll be the year 2013, or in your case, that might be, right, white, right, for one of the demographics, and the data would be 71. In this case, our data is going to be 100.5 because we're using cable users. Notice that the name is a string value, and there is a comma after it. Right, and we'll see that those exist in all of these places, and it'll only work if that's the case. So what I can do now is I can actually write in the rest of the data from this cable graph that I've been using, right? So the data, the name, right, is the year, and the data is the total users. And I can add this data. And what I can do now is I can actually click run code, and we'll get a graph. right? And we'll see that it's actually working. And this is all from the data that I just hand coded into this program. We'll notice though that there's no X or Y axis categories. That's something that you need to fill out in the options here. This options variable controls the formatting for this specific chart. So in this case, we want to fill in the title for the Y-axis attribute. And in this case, we are going to do users in millions. And notice that this also needs to be a string. And here, what we can do is we can do TV service. And if we click run code again, we'll notice that the X and Y axes are now filled in. So this is how we can actually how we can code these kinds of visualizations ourselves. Now, this is using a program called Toast, which does a lot of work in the background. But as we can see here, these are different variables that you can actually encode with data that will represent and become a data visualization. So what I'd like everybody to do now, and notice this, if I get rid of this comma right here and I try to run this, it won't show up anymore, right? Because there's an error in the program. So it's important that all the commas are where they are and the strings are where they are. If I run this again, we'll see that it works. So as you play around with it, make sure that if you're deleting anything, you're paying attention to what you're deleting. You can always reset the code by going here to more in history. There's this reset button. But this is how we can actually hand code some of these projects. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to, using the same voter registration data that you had used in the previous exercise, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to hand code that data visualization here. And so what we'll do with the remaining time, I know we don't have a lot, but for the next 5 minutes, let's see if you can actually get this data from the voter registration data and turn it into a working graph. So let's spend some time working on that now. And as a reminder, if it's not working, is the name value a string? Is there a comma after your name value? And did you accidentally delete something? So these are things to think about as you're working through your visualization. All right, everybody, I want to be respectful of your time. So what I'll do now is I'll just show you, what this representation might look like. So what we see here is, right, we might include the name and the data like this. And when we run this, what we see is the registered voters as a share of racial demographic. And so this is how we could, code this graph using this library. Now, because we are technically out of time, I just want to show you what we would have done as a way to encourage you to continue playing around with these different tools. The activity that you can go to next would be the chart your own graph activity. And in this chart your own graph activity, you would have an opportunity to look for data sets of your own to try to visualize and look at. So if you go to this activity, you'll notice that there are a couple of links here that link to different data websites that contain data sets that you can use, that you can create a visualization with. One thing to note in these different graphs is there is a little button here at the side that can actually allow you to export your graph to JPEG. And so what you could do here is you could save this to your desktop or something like that, so that you could have proof of your created visualizations using this graph generator. So I highly recommend going to this creating your own graph, chart your own graph, creating your own visualization, and then exporting that image and actually sharing that image with us at CodeHS so we can see some of the cool visualizations that you create, either as a bar chart or as a line chart or a pie chart, because those are some of the other options that you can play around with. So, moving forward, if you still have time, I'd highly recommend trying to create your own graph. There's also an extra activity at the end where you can code your own graph. So the data that you find for this graph generator, you can input all of that data into our existing program and you can figure out how you can actually hand code the visualization yourself. So, I have a couple of examples of that here of a chart that I made that looks at, contributions from owners and commissioners from different leagues and whether or not they donated to Republican or Democratic candidates. So we can see that most of the different leagues support Republican candidates, which makes sense given that they make a lot of money and they want their money protected. And so this is something that you can do with the chart generator. So we highly recommend continuing to work on this. We want you to showcase your program. So if you're logged in, you can feel free to copy and paste that URL into this chat, or we have a form that you can fill out. And so this form is basically to give a little bit of feedback on, our presentation today, but also for you to share your projects. So if you have an image that you'd like to share with us, or you've got a program that you'd like to share with us, you can link it to us using this form. So you can give it to us, either today or some other time in the future. We'll keep an eye out for that. But we'd love everybody's just feedback on, what you learned, whether or not some of the things that were there were useful, or whether or not, there were things that we could have done differently in the 45 minutes that we were able to work with you. And then lastly, if you want to learn more, you should check out the CodeHS web development course to learn more about data visualization and how you can create visually appealing and interactive websites. If you found the stuff that we were looking at interesting, then you could certainly learn more about it here. All of the different coding programs that we work on here were built using, all of this was just built using HTML and JavaScript. And it would allow you an opportunity to develop your skills a little bit more. So check out the web development course. In the meantime, we hope that you enjoyed this, got to learn a little bit more, and we hope that you continue to play around with it because there's a lot more functionality that you can play around with this generator and the Toast UI. Oh, it says the form needs permission. Okay, I will change that right now. In the meantime, I'll change that right now.
I think I updated it, Alex.
Oh, you did? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Claire.
Like,
okay, so
check.
the form permission should be updated now. And feel free to fill that in. Otherwise, if anybody has any questions in the meantime, feel free to write them in the chat. Otherwise, we've really happy that you all joined us here today and hope that you got something out of this. All right, since there are no questions, we'll be closing out now. Once again, Claire, Ebony, Ryan, and I are really grateful for you to show up, and we hope that you got something out of this. Have a great rest of your week and great rest of your CS Ed week.